Of all the great video game compilations that have come out this year, the Castlevania Dominus Collection is one of my favorites. It brilliantly collects Nintendo DS classics like Dawn of Sorrow, Portrait of Ruin, and Order of Ecclesia, as well as including a new version of Haunted Castle. I've been playing a lot of this game recently, which got me wondering what the critics thought of these side-scrolling adventure games. To answer that question, I decided to flip through the pages of Electronic Gaming Monthly, GamePro, Edge, and more classic magazines to see what the critics said back when these games first came out. Get that holy water and wooden stake ready because this is a very stabby episode of Castlevania Review Crew. After having a successful run on the Game Boy Advance, the next obvious step for the Castlevania series was of course the Nintendo DS. Dawn of Sorrow is yet another 2D side-scrolling Castlevania game, this time with slightly better graphics, more role-playing mechanics, and some gimmicky touchscreen stuff that really split the fan base. This is the direct sequel to 2003's Aria of Sorrow, which leaves us with a rattled Soma Cruz who discovers that he's Dracula's reincarnation. The good news is that Soma, with a little help from his friends, is able to thwart fate and avoid becoming the new Dark Lord. However, it won't take much to send our wannabe hero on a dark path, setting up a morally twisted tale set in the far future of 2036. Let's see what the critics said about Dawn of Sorrow. Electronic Gaming Monthly loved the game, giving it an average score of 9 out of 10. Mark summed it up this way: as reliable as Dracula's castle reappearing every 100 years, Dawn of Sorrow is everything we've come to expect from the excellent handheld Castlevanias. Responsive controls, beautiful, crisp 2D graphics, and old-fashioned gameplay that'll keep you up way past your bedtime. It's a formula that's changed little in almost a decade, but many refinements here make a difference, especially the ability to collect multiple monsters' souls to increase powers and upgrade your weapons. It keeps you gladly swanning at enemies as you crisscross the castle, and along with awesome playable characters and plenty of secrets, makes it impossible to put down Dawn of Sorrow until long after the first time you see the credits roll. Shu agreed, but didn't like it quite as much as Mark. Musty hallways, skeletons, bats, and flying Medusa heads, the slick weapon that's just out of reach because I haven't scored the double jump boots just yet. Wait, haven't I visited this castle many times before? Yes, Dawn of Sorrow walks down the same design path as the Game Boy Advance predecessors. But that is just fine because it has the same excellent pacing that makes exploration, combat, and leveling up so compelling. Now, believe it or not, EGM's 9 out of 10 is smack dab in the middle of the scores. Nintendo Power gave the game a 9, and you saw the equivalent over at GamePro when they gave Dawn of Sorrow a score of 4.5 out of 5. If you're looking for a counter opinion, then let's go ahead and take a look at Edge issue 155. Giving the game a 7 out of 10, Edge explained that the core gameplay remains largely underdeveloped from Symphony of the Night, and despite the additions, is aspirational rather than inspirational. It's certainly the best handheld Castlevania game, but Igarashi's team is too dedicated to the framework he masterminded for this to be anything innovatory. That said, Dawn of Sorrow never feels outdated. It's mature and refined, but neither close enough in imitation nor bold enough in reinvention to reach the greatness to which it clearly aspires. As usual, Edge was the outlier here, with pretty much every other magazine raving about this first Castlevania game on the DS. For example, Retro Gamer gave it a score of 92% in their 25th issue. Game Informer actually went a little bit higher, giving it a 9.25 and concluding that in a genre that has been iterated on for the better part of 2 decades, Dawn of Sorrow manages to feel fresh and new. It's not perfect, it could be longer, the story still fails to impress, and some horribly imbalanced combos are around. But there's not a DS owner I wouldn't recommend this title to. In other words, Dawn of Sorrow picked up right where Aria of Sorrow left off, both in the story and the quality. If you liked the Game Boy Advance trilogy, then you're gonna love this game. It's that simple. Released 1 year later, Portrait of Ruin takes us back to World War II and continues the story of Castlevania Bloodlines. Although the setting and the characters may have changed, this installment keeps a lot of the same updates and improvements that we found in the first DS game, Dawn of Sorrow. It's also the first handheld Castlevania game to have English voiceovers. This is another strong entry in the long-running series, thanks in large part to the strong list of bonuses, including alternate modes that allow you to play as a bunch of different Castlevania characters. I'm a big fan of this entry, but what about the critics? Did they agree with me? Of course they did! Of the 3 games that we're going to talk about today, Portrait of Ruin is the one with the most consistent reviews. That said, it's not the one that Electronic Gaming Monthly liked the most, as they gave it an average score of 8.7 out of 10, down ever so slightly from the last game. Jeremy was the one that ended up bringing the score down, arguing that the game's good bits are really good, like the exceptional dual character system, each with their own advantages. It's a nice attempt to merge the modern Castlevania style with the classic feel, although it falls short of the source material. The stages lack challenge and feature way too much copy and paste design, especially in the game's second half. Overall, though, Portrait is a slightly disappointing step back from 2005's superb Dawn of Sorrow. Michael liked it a bit more, saying, sure, Portrait of Ruin ain't perfect, but at least it does something the previous GBA Vanias have neglected to do: stick a stake in the monotony. Both the character switching and the pseudo levels make the main castle crawling play less like a rotting corpse. My only complaint? Konami needs to chuck the terrible anime art design in the coffin. Once again, Edge gave the lowest score, but not by much. With a score of 8 out of 10, this was Edge Magazine's favorite Castlevania game on the DS. The meat of the game remains the franchise's staple hacking and slashing. It's a tad repetitive perhaps, but mitigated by the delightfully reactive animations and the masses of monsters on offer. And breaking the potential monotony is the addition of optional subquests, which provide satisfying objectives when you run into the game's deliberate sticking points. Full of bravado, packed with features, and brimming with invention, this 20-year-old veteran is as vital and relevant as ever. Now moving up the scale, we have a 3-way tie for the highest score. Game Informer gave the game a 9 out of 10, down slightly from the 9.25 out of 10 that they gave the previous title. Nintendo Power also gave the game a 9 out of 10, the same score that they gave Dawn of Sorrow. And then there's GamePro, who gave it a 4.5 out of 5 and concluded that all the changes make for a better game. But the genius of Portrait of Ruin is that it retains the elements that made the previous title so much fun. Despite the removal of the touchscreen functionality, the core gameplay is still a total blast, and upgrading weapons and abilities keeps things from getting dull. The only real complaint with Portrait of Ruin is the process of reloading a game once you've died is incredibly cumbersome and inconvenient. It would have been easy for Konami to lazily release an underwhelming remake or compilation to celebrate Castlevania's 20th anniversary. Instead, they released Portrait of Ruin, a game that not only reaffirms the series' greatness, but is easily one of the best handheld titles released this year. By shaking things up a bit, Konami was able to find a way to keep Castlevania fresh and exciting. Yeah, this is another strong game that you're going to have a lot of fun playing or replaying in the Dominus Collection. Order of Ecclesia isn't just the final Castlevania game on the Nintendo DS, it's also the final new game in the mainline series. After this release, Konami opted to reboot the franchise with Lords of Shadow on the PlayStation 3 and Xbox 360, which was of course then followed by Mirror of Fate on the 3DS and a proper sequel on home consoles. The good news is that Order of Ecclesia takes the original timeline out on a real high note. It takes the series back to the 1800s and chronologically follows Symphony of the Night, giving us a more interesting world to explore that isn't just confined to a creepy castle. This DS game also adds a new combat system built around glyphs, giving players a surprising amount of variety when it comes to vampire hunting. It also makes use of the DS to Wii connectivity for that terrible fighting game Castlevania Judgment, but the less said about that, the better. Now, when it comes to the reviews, the scores are mostly in line with the previous two games that were released on the DS. Electronic Gaming Monthly, for example, liked it a little bit more than Portrait of Ruin and gave it an A-. Why the minus? So what keeps Ecclesia from ousting Symphony as the ultimate Castlevania? A well-intended set of side quests that sees you running all over creation to rescue kidnapped villagers ends up becoming a disastrous chore when you're forced to comb every pixel of the world to do their bidding. You must rescue everyone in order to access the last third of the game, and the paucity of the in-game hints evokes the classic frustration of Simon's Quest. Now, it is worth noting that there were critics that were starting to grow tired of the Castlevania formula. Game Informer went from giving the previous game's top scores to being in the middle of the pack with an 8.25 out of 10. The same goes for GamePro, who went down to a straight 4 out of 5. Now, that may not seem like a bad score, but they had a lot of complaints. The boss fights will also frustrate you, as you'll usually defeat them only after learning their patterns, something you can't do without first facing them multiple times. And there are confusing environmental puzzles that have no clear solution. I'm currently hopelessly stuck in the game and I have no idea how to proceed. At this point, I've resorted to sending an email to Konami to beg them for help. Wait a second, hang on. They gave the game 4 stars and they couldn't even beat it? Man, that's a lot kinder than I would have been. Over at Edge, they agreed with GamePro about a lot of the complaints, especially when it came to the excessive side quests. However, unlike GamePro, they gave the game a much lower score, a 6 out of 10. From the worst to the best, the highest marks came from the official Nintendo magazine, who gave it a 92%. From working out the best combination of glyph spells and figuring out the weaknesses of particularly nasty monsters, to discovering secret areas and earning medals for beating bosses without being hit once, there's very little to fault Order of Ecclesia. Of course, we don't doubt that plenty of people will disagree. They'll moan that the music isn't haunting enough, or the fact that the hero is a lady, or more likely, that it's just too hard for them. But we'll say this, ignore those fools and just experience Order of Ecclesia for yourself. You'll thank us for it in the end, we guarantee it. Okay, these reviews are all over the place, ranging from 60% all the way up to 92%. There's not a whole lot of agreement between these sides. And that GamePro review still rubs me the wrong way. Personally, I dig this entry, but I definitely see some glaring problems. Problems that could have easily been solved if Konami released a proper sequel. What do you say, Konami? Hey, thanks for watching me break down these classic reviews. If you liked what you saw here, then you should know that we post new episodes just like this every time classic games get added to modern systems. We have a whole playlist with more than 100 episodes just like this one. Now, here's the question I have for you. What's your favorite Castlevania DS game? I know the fans are a little split, so I'm excited to see your picks in the comments below. In other news, we're going to be back next week with another horror-themed episode of Review Crew, just in time for Halloween. While you wait for that, I strongly recommend you click that subscribe button and support what we're doing here. Until then.